Hi folks, Matt here. What I'm going to do today is take you through how I painted this Plague Marine. Relatively straightforward. There's quite a number of steps, but it's not that complicated. It's the colour I use for all of my Death Guard, both 30k and 40k. Yeah, hopefully you'll find it useful. It's the first time I've done a video like this. I hope it comes out okay. Hopefully the lighting's alright and all that sort of stuff. And most importantly, I hope you find it useful. And thank you very much for watching. So let's go back to the beginning and take it from there. Thanks.
Hello ladies and gents, something slightly different today. Matt at West Berks here, and today what we're going to be doing is talking you through how I paint a Plague Marine, or any of the new Nurgle range. So it works for obviously the Blightlord Terminators or any of the other Marine models. So we are going to be taking this guy here, just as you can see, just undercoated black with just a bad and black spray, Chaos Black spray, and we're going to paint them up in the colours that I would use. So yeah, hopefully it'll be useful. Now I don't consider myself to be the best painter in the world, and it's just the way that I do it, but yeah, hopefully you find it useful. Cheers. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need is Rakarth flesh, and that will be going all over the entirety of the armour to begin with. I'm going to try and avoid things like the cloak or the gun, but it doesn't really matter if you get it all over that, so we'll do a coat of that and we'll be back in a second. Okay, so first coat of Rakarth flesh. It's fairly thin, it doesn't matter if it doesn't cover too well, in fact it won't cover particularly well over the black, but that's fine because we'll just add another one afterwards to get the total coverage of the colour that we're after, and that's fine. So I'll finish this one off and put a second coat on him, and then I'll be back once the Rakarth flesh is done. Okay, so there's the first coat of Rakarth flesh. As you can see, it's quite blotchy and not covering completely, but that's fine. We'll just wait for that to dry, and we'll then put a second coat on, which should give us a decent coverage. Let's have a quick look. There we go, that's okay. And then so they're obviously quite well watered down, these layers, but that's just so we can get maximum coverage without losing too much of the detail, especially on these, because there's tons of detail on these models actually, which does actually make them quite fun to paint. So let's just do that. Okay, and we'll be back in a sec after the second layer's done. Okay, so that's the second layer done, and you can see it's looking much better now. I've tried to avoid the gun for the most part, but obviously doing the little tiny bits in here makes that not particularly easy, but it doesn't matter too much because we're going to be going over that anyway. I've also done the shoulder pads completely as well with Rakarth flesh, even though they're going to be green eventually. It's just an easier colour to work up from than the black with the way that I do my greens. So all over the armour, the backpack as well is also that same colour. So I'm going to let this dry properly, and in the meantime I'll work on the other four in this little collection that I'm doing. I tend to work in sort of batches of 5 anyway, just to get the maximum done at a time really. So I'll be back once that one's dry and we'll get on to the next stage. Okay, next step is Pallid Witch Flesh, and we're going to do pretty much the exact same thing, just going over all of the armour panels with this. Again, quite watered down, so a couple of thinner coats, because the first one will definitely not cover anyway, so we'll just go with a second coat after that. So once that's done, I will be back to show you what it looks like. Alright, so first layer of the Pallid Witch Flesh is done. As you can see, it's not particularly, it hasn't covered particularly well, especially down on the legs down here. And on the head, so we're going to do another quick layer of that. While this guy's been drying, I've also gone through and done the pallid witch flesh on the other four guys. So we'll get that done, and we'll be back in a moment. Okay, so as you can see now, that's the second coat of pallid witch flesh done. Sorry, these lights aren't particularly great for some reason. So it's now much smoother. There's still the odd little bit that's not particularly clear, not particularly smooth, but that's fine because we're going for a sort of dirty look anyway. Next thing we're going to do is the trims of the shoulder pads and any other bits and pieces that I think need to be bronze. For that, I'm using Vallejo Model Air Rust, but I think the Games Workshop equivalent would be something like Balthazar Gold, maybe? Okay, so that's the bronze done. Excuse me, that's the Vallejo Rust or bronze colour done. Just on the shoulder pad trims, any detail like the 3 little dots there, a little bit of trim around the gun, a little bit on the grenade, and the guard on the plague sword on his back. I've also been through and done it on the remaining 5 models here as well, just while I was going through. So the next thing we will do is we will take some Agrax Earthshade, and with this, if I can just find my brush, with this we are going to do a recess shade on the armour. So where are we? So we're just doing a recess wash across all of the armour panels, and we're also going to go over any of the bronze bits or the brass bits as well with Agrax Earthshade, just to give them a wash as well. So if I just quickly go round the remaining bits on the chest piece here, you can see what it will then look like afterwards. And then I'll continue on with this over the remainder of the models. Now it doesn't have to be perfect because obviously they're Death Guard, so they're going to be a little bit grimy anyway, but we will be darkening down the armour with another wash in a minute, so don't go over the entirety of the armour, literally just keep it to the recesses. This probably isn't the best example actually for this because he's got this gigantic mouth in the middle of his chest, but hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So hopefully you can see there it's just now darker in the recesses around all of the detail and in between the armour panels, and so we'll go and do that. And the other thing we're going to do, any of these little holes on his armour or any nicks or tears or what have you, we're just going to fill them up with Agrax as well for the time being. So yeah, we'll finish this off on this guy. We'll move on to the other models in my little group of 5 that I'm doing, and once they're dry we'll be back for the next step. Okay, so as you can see I've done a recess shade of Agrax Earthshade, and I've gone over all of the bronze as well, so it's just dulled it down a little bit. The next stage is, if I can find me little dropper bottle. This is the armour wash. This will go over all of the armour, not the shoulder pads because they're going to be green eventually, but this will go over all of the armour panels. It's a mixture of Seraphim Sepia, Lamia Medium, a tiny bit of Agrax Earthshade and a little bit of water, and it just dulls the armour down a little bit and makes it a sort of dirty brownish colour. So we'll do that and then we'll show you what that looks like afterwards. Okay, so as mentioned, we're just going to go over all of the armour panels with this. It will just start to dull down the armour because at the moment it's just that very bright, just straight pallid witch flesh, which is a bit too white for what I'm going for. So let's just do that everywhere. It doesn't matter too much if it pulls anywhere because again it will just add a little bit of dirty look to the armour as well. But we want to try and make it as smooth a coat as we can, and ideally no pooling, but as I say, it doesn't matter too much if there is a little bit. So let's go over all of this. Make sure to get his hand and all the little bits inside there as well. Inside of his leg on this particular model, annoyingly, is covered by the cloak, but hopefully we'll be able to get that. And then just over the backpack, in there as well. So that's all of the armour done. It gives a sort of yellowy, browny, dirty colour to it, and once it dries it will actually be a little bit lighter, but it will still take away the whiteness of the armour. So we'll let that dry. It'll probably take 10 or 20 minutes to dry properly, and in the meantime I'll go on and continue on the remainder of the models, and we'll be back once it's dry for the next stage. Okay, so once that's dry, you can see the difference between the two. It's that nice sort of dirty, browny, oldish colour, I guess, would be a good description for it. Next thing to do is we need to... So that's basically the armour complete now, until we get right at the end where we start adding some technical paints and weathering and things such as that. Next thing we're going to do is the areas of cloth. So there's this tabardy bit on the front and the cloak on the back, and the first thing we need to do for that is give it a coat of Skaven Blight Dinge. So let's get that done. Just put a little splodge in the middle, and I just give all of the cloth a layer of Skaven Blight Dinge. And then once this is done, I'll be back to show you what that looks like. It might need a couple of coats because it's just a layer paint, so it's relatively thin. So you might need a couple of coats to completely cover the black and any overspill that you've had from doing the armour. So we'll be back in a moment with that. Okay, so that's the Skaven Blight Dinge done on the cloth. Hopefully you can see that it's now that sort of dark grey colour. I've also done the back, the remnants of the scabbard on this particular model as well. Next step is going to be anything bone, so the teeth, the horny bits, the bit of spine poking out the back of the backpack, and probably also any of the maggots on this particular model. Will be getting a couple of coats of Rhinox hide, thinned down, as their base, and then we'll work up from there to make them look a bit more like bone, because we want them to look different from the armour, but still that it's a similar colour, but we don't want them to just be exactly the same as the armour. So we'll work through these and be back in a moment. Okay, that's the brown done. You can see we've done the teeth, we've done picked out the maggots and bits and pieces as well. I've also done the skull on his grenade and the spiky bits, and in this particular model I've done the handle of his sword as well, just to Mr. Maggot, just to make it that little bit different, so it's not just all metal. So what we're going to do, before we start highlighting up the maggots and bony bits, we're going to go into the metal. So we're going to do lead belcher, and that's going to be on the remaining bits of his gun, backpack, exhaust vents, the sword, the grenade, the little bits on the side of his helmet up there, and just some other bits and pieces, chainmail on the front as well. So we'll do that, and then we'll come back once that's finished. Okay, that's the silvers done. So we've done the chainmail down here, the little bits on the side of his helmet, the haft of the grenade, the blight launcher, and the bits on the backpack, and the sword, and the back of his leg. What we're going to do now is we're going to null oil over the metal and also on the brown that we did earlier on the teeth and everything, just to darken that down, and then we will get on to some of the other details. Okay, so a bit of null oil. As I mentioned, we'll go over all of the brown bits, so all of the teeth, all of the bones, etc. And in this particular model's case, all of the maggots as well. You need to be quite careful with some of the maggots, like these ones down here, because they are very close to the armour. So try not to get too much of the null oil spilt onto the armour if you can help it. And then we'll just obviously go over the silver bits as well, as I mentioned, just to darken it all down. So I'll finish off those and I'll come back in a second. And I should probably note we're also going over the cloth bits on this model as well. So any of the Mechanicus standard grey areas that we painted, we're also going to go over those with null oil as well. You can be a bit more liberal with this one, it doesn't matter too much, and if it starts pooling in the recesses, that's obviously a good thing. So back in a second. Okay, so the null oil is all dry now, which is good. So the next step is Ushabti bone or something similar. I also use skeleton bone from Army Painter sometimes. And this is going to be over the teeth, anywhere, the maggots, and any spiky, bony bits, and the skull on the grenade as well. So I'll get that done. I'll start picking that up. I'm going to try and leave a bit of the Rhinox hide in the recesses, but if I don't manage to, then it's not a huge problem because I can just go over it again, maybe with some Agrax or something at the end if I need to. But we will try and keep it clearly separated from the armour, so it's obvious that it's not just a bit of the armour. So I'll go over the rest of the bony bits with this, as well as the maggots. So there's one in there. And it'll probably require a second coat. So once I've done that, and the second coat, I'll come back and show you what it looks like. And it'll be, I'm hoping it'll be clearly different colour from the armour. But as I said, we can always just give it another coat of Agrax afterwards if we need to, just to make sure it's definitely different from the armour. But I will be back in a moment with the bone done. Okay, so all the bony bits done. It's a very similar colour actually to the armour, which is a bit of a shame. So what I'm going to do is just Agrax Earthshade over all the bony bits, which should hopefully solve that problem and maintain any of the delineation if I've messed it up while painting it, so it keeps that separation of the bony bits and the armour. And we'll go over the maggots as well at the same time. So let's just do that quickly. So now you can see it is getting that little bit darker, and as the Agrax dries, it should then become a lot more obviously separated, is the plan. I may need to do a second coat of Agrax depending on how it looks, but we'll see once it's dry. So I will finish this bit off and then we will be back. Alright, so that's a coat of Agrax over the teeth and maggots and horny bits, and hopefully you can see that there is now a bit of a difference between the colour of that and the armour. What I'm going to do now, before I start doing all of the highlights and bits on the cloth, is I'm going to paint the tongue red and the shoulder pads green.
So first things first, with the shoulders we use Castellan Green. This is actually the airbrush paint, but it works quite well for me. I just do a couple of thin coats of it and it goes on alright, and then I will do a couple of coats of Elysian Green over the top of that. And for the tongue, what I'm using is either Vallejo Model Colour Transparent Red or the Army Painter's Dragon Red, and they both work alright. So I mean, any kind of games workshop red would work fine. It depends how bright you want the tongue to be. These make them quite dark, so that's why I prefer those ones. So I'll get that done and then I'll come back in a moment. Okay, so what I've done is I've painted a couple of coats of Vallejo Model Colour Transparent Red on the tongue, and I've done 2 coats of Elysian Green and then, no sorry, beg your pardon, 2 coats of Castellan Green and then 2 coats of Elysian Green on the shoulders. They're very bright at the moment, which I'm not a fan of, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the shoulders a coat of Athonian Camo Shade, and I'm going to give the tongue a coat of Carabao Crimson. So we'll be back once those are done. Alright, and the final colour I need to do on this model before I can start doing proper highlights on the cloak and stuff is all of these fleshy bits on the back. There's a couple around that exhaust pipe and these bits down here. These need a coat of tanned flesh from Army Painter. Again, I'm sure there's a very similar colour in the Citadel range. It's been a long time since I've bought Citadel flesh coloured paints, so I don't know what it is, I'm afraid. But any kind of skin colour would do. So this is just the way I do them. Obviously, I know a lot of people do different coloured fleshy bits on their Plague Marines. But I like mine to actually look like skin. A bit more natural looking than some of the sort of purples and reds and things that I've seen from other places. But feel free to do obviously whatever colour you like. This is just the way I do mine. So we'll just do that bit up there. And then it will need a wash, and then we can start doing some highlights and stuff properly for everything. Just very quickly finish this bit off. It might need a second coat, and if it does, once it's dry, I'll go back and do that. But I think we should be okay, because it's not going to be a particularly healthy looking skin tone come the end of it anyway. So I don't think it would be too bad if it was a bit blotchy. But let's just try and make it as clean as we can for the purposes of this. Right, so there we go. So that's that done. So that's all of the base colours now done, and a number of the parts are actually completely finished. The armour is completely done, the metals are done, with the exception of maybe a bit of highlighting and dry brushing and stuff. Obviously there will be some technical paints. We're going to get some riser rust involved and some typhus corrosion and things towards the end. But for the moment, that's the base colours all put on there and mostly washed. The cloak we're going to build up to quite a bright grey, potentially even white on the extreme edges, and then we're going to wash it all with Athonian Camo Shade to give it a sort of dirty greeny grey look, which is just the way I do my cloaks. The bone is going to get another coat of Agrax Earthshade towards the end, just to make it darker at the tips. And we'll highlight the tongue up a bit, and we'll give the tongue a big gloss varnish at the end, I think, just to make it look even more disgusting. And then we'll sort out the skin. We should be pretty much there, I think. So back in a moment, once I've put some highlights on the cloak. Alright, so what I've done in preparation for doing the cloak is I've got some pure Skaven Black Dinge, some Skaven Black Dinge mixed with Dawnstone, some Dawnstone and Pallid Witch Flesh mixed together, and I've added a bit of Lamia Medium to all of them. So what I'm going to do is start with the Skaven Black Dinge and just go back over the majority of the cloak
or cloth rather, with this, leaving the Nuln Oil washed grey in the deepest recesses. So it does take a little while to do this, because obviously with the Lamium medium you're more glazing it than anything else, so there's no need to rush, just take your time. It will, as I say, take a little while to get this properly done, but that's alright. So we're just trying to, also if you see, I'm hoping you can see here, the Nuln Oil has pulled a bit in there, and that's not really the place I would want it to be, so with this mix we can just go over that and just leave a bit of that in the recesses where it makes sense to be, a bit darker, and then just brighten up the rest of it with this colour, even though it's still just essentially going to be sort of Skaven Blight Dinge colour. So we'll continue doing this over all of the cloak, and again we've got the sword, the remnants I suppose of the scabbard on this model as well, and we'll do the same thing there as well. So we'll leave the darkest bits with the Nuln Oil, and we'll just have a bit of the Skaven Blight Dinge again over the top to just brighten it up ever so slightly, like that. So once we've done that, we're going to take a mix of the Dawnstone and the Skaven Blight Dinge, again with the Lamium medium in it, and we're going to go over the higher points of the cloak and any cloth pieces with this colour, just to make it that bit brighter. So any edges, any tears, like down here we've got the folded back bit, we'll go over that down the edges of the cloak, and just any of the slightly higher bits that where it makes sense to be that bit brighter. And it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not, it just needs to be, there just needs to be that transition that you can see, because this way when we put the Athonian camo shade over the top, it'll, because it's grey and not black, it will still tint the entirety of the cloth pieces, but it'll then look that much brighter over the, in this case the pieces with the Dawnstone, like this part of the cloak here. Let's see if I can get that in focus. This part down here will obviously be significantly brighter and greener than the piece on the inside, just because of that addition of the Dawnstone there as well. On the inside we're just going to do a little bit of this colour, and then we'll go to the front of it, the little loinclothy bit, and again we're only really interested in picking out parts of it. We still want to have the difference in, or rather the different greys visible. So there we can see, assuming I can get the light to work properly, we can see, let's see if this works, that there is, that's better, that there is some of the darker colour in the recesses down here, and we've building up to the Dawnstone mix on the edges. So what we'll do now is we'll take some of the almost pure Dawnstone, and we'll pick out the higher points of the cloth, leaving that mixture below. Hopefully this is coming out okay, and we see we've got the we've picked out the tears, so the tears are just the Dawnstone over the raggedy bits, and on the back again we'll just go down the edge. There's another tear just here, you can see the folded over bit, so we'll pick out the whole of that folded over bit with the brighter colour, And we'll go on the raised sections up here. Let's get a bit more of that. And we'll just keep this going all the way through, or all the way down rather. So you can see that there's the transitions. And again, the bottom of the cloak on this side, and just the raggedy edges there. A little bit on the inside, but we've already got a couple of colours in there, and it should be darker anyway because it's mostly covered up. So we can see the cloak, especially on the back here, we go from the Skaven Black Dinge with the Nuln Oil in there to a mixture of the Skaven Black Dinge, or to the Skaven Black Dinge again, then a light mix, and then the more almost pure Dawnstone there as well. I'll just do the scabbard. Again, just picking out the raised bits because we want to keep that darker colour in there. And then finally, we've got the mixture of Dawnstone and Pallid Witchflesh, again with a bit of Lamia Medium in it. And this one, we just want to, you'll see it's significantly brighter. And we just want to get the edges particularly. So we're basically edge highlighting it, but we'll also go over the holes in there and any folded back bits where it's torn. And we're just going to add some little bigger stretches of it down towards the bottom where it's frayed and caught the or a bit torn on the way down towards the bottom. So you should be able to see that it's not just around the edges. There's bits of this colour going slightly further up the cloak, and the highest points we're going to run this down there as well. Oops, that's a little bit too much. Go from the top and just a smidge down there and around the top and across there. Now it might look a little bit garish, as I said, but don't worry about it because when we wash it, it's all going to go that sort of greeny grey colour, and it will just add a bit more depth to it with those additional highlights on. So we'll go around the bits on the scabbard that need to be this colour. Again, mostly just around the tears and sort of an edge highlight on it as well, just to brighten up some bits of it. And then going back round to the front, we'll do the edges with a bit of tear at the bottom. We'll do a few streaky bits towards the bottom, and there's another tear. And we'll go back around the edges up here. So it doesn't look particularly good now, I have to say, but that's fine because it will then look better once it's washed with the Athonian camo shade. So that's that, and this will hopefully, assuming I've done this in a manner to which I'm happy, this should. Sorry, just realised I need to just do the inside edge on here as well, just so we've got those tears and bits there as well. So this should then mark the end of the work we need to do on any of the cloth, which would be good. So all we then need to do is a quick highlight on the bony bits and on the tongue, and then we need to just darken up the spiky bones coming out of the shoulders, and then we're pretty much there, to be honest, apart from some additional detail like weathering and technical paints and such. So I will wait for that to dry, do a bit more, and then start highlighting the bones and bits. Alright, so as mentioned, I've just very briefly run over the bone and the skull there on the grenade with a little bit more of the Ushabti bone, just to pick out the edges. And then what we're doing, I've just done on the horn on the head, is just towards the top 2/3, I would have said, just putting a bit more of the Agrax Earthshade on, just to darken down the tip of the bone spike, so leaving the base of it brighter than the tip. It doesn't quite come across very well at the moment, that's because it's still wet, I think. But once that dries, that should be a bit darker, and then after that we're going to put another coat just a lot towards the very end of it. So what I'm going to do now, the cloak and the cloth is dry, so I'm going to get my Athonian camo shade, and I'm going to just cover those bits with the Athonian camo shade. So this should, there's a combination of effects here. It should darken it down a bit, just with the additional wash over it, but it should also, hopefully, tie all the colours together and give us a very nice sort of greeny grey effect. So let me just finish that. I'm not, as you can see, I'm not being particularly careful with it. I'm putting quite a lot on, but that's fine because the green is relatively muted actually in Athonian camo shade, so it's more of sort of a greeny brown. But hopefully the plan is with the grey underneath, it should come together quite nicely. I'll go over the scabbard there as well. Just get all the different sides. It should come together nicely. And as I say, give us a nice sort of greeny grey, dirty, horrible, manky kind of colour. So we'll let that dry. And in the meantime, I am going to give the fleshy bits a wash of Reikland Flesh Shade. So, if I can find my pot, there it is. So Reikland Flesh Shade. So while the green's drying, because we're not anywhere near the green, we're going to go with Reikland Flesh Shade over here, like so. And again, you can be fairly liberal with the covering of this. It's not like you can only put a tiny bit on. Actually, in some respects, the darker you make it, the better it will turn out in the end. So that'll be that. While I'm waiting for the green and the Reikland Flesh Shade to dry, I'm going to give it a tongue a little bit of a highlight. So what I'm going to use for that is the Dragon Red from Army Painter, just to pick out the edges and just make those a little bit brighter. I mean, it's not the brightest of reds, this, but it is brighter than what I was using, which was the transparent red from Vallejo. So you should see, once we get this going, you should see that there is a bit of a difference. And obviously we've done a Caribou Crimson over the transparent red as well, so that will have darkened it down a bit anyway. So what we should have is the transparent red in the middle with the Caribou Crimson over it and in the darkest recesses, and then we've got the Dragon Red over the top. So let's just make sure that is on all of the highest points, like so. And it's relatively subtle, the difference between the two. I'm just going to do a little bit more transparent red down the centre just to darken the middle of that up a little bit. But that's fine in there. So once everything's dry, we'll continue on with the remaining colours that we need to do, which is to finish the skin and do another coat of Agrax. In fact, I might be able to do that now. I think my Agrax was dried, so I can do another coat of the Agrax on the shoulder, on the spikes as well, just so we can have everything drying towards the same time. Now, as I mentioned, this is just going to be towards the tip. We've already done about 2/3 of the way down, so this is going to be probably the final third, I would have said, just to darken that end of the horn down a bit more. Oh, I went a bit far on that, but that's fine. Like so. Okay, fantastic. So we're back once all of this is dry. Okay, so all of the washes are now, well, mostly dry, but that's fine. Not nowhere where I need them to be. Are they still wet? So what we've got on the palette here is a mixture of barbarian flesh from, no, I beg your pardon, tanned flesh from Army Painter, and some pallid witch flesh. And what we're going to do is just the raised sections of the skin areas with this mixture just to brighten them up a little bit. So we'll go around there, leaving the darker mixture in the recesses where applicable. Like so. This guy actually doesn't have all that much flesh on him, so it's not the best of examples, but I can show you one in a minute that's got a better example of it. So that's that, and then we've done another mixture of more pallid witch flesh in there just to brighten it up that little bit more, and this is going to be just on the very edges as well, on the very raised sections. So this bit, there's some little knobbly bits that we're just going to try and pick out there with that brighter colour, and that's pretty much the flesh done. Not overly complicated. So with that, I believe the only thing we have left to do now is there's a couple of little dribbly bits which we're going to do. I've got a way of doing them that I think works quite well, and then we are going to, just checking to see if there's anything else that I need to do on him. No, I don't believe so. So we're going to do a little bit of darkening down of this metal again, actually, with another Null Oil, because that's a bit bright for my liking. Then we're going to pick out the very edges of all the metal with Necron Compound, just to highlight everything up and pick out the edges. And then we're going to do very selected bits of Typhus Corrosion, Nihilak Oxide, and Riser Rust. And we're going to make the tongue all shiny with some Ard Coat. And then we're pretty much done. So we'll be back in a second with... I've forgotten what I said I was going to do. Oh yeah, after I've null oiled the gun again. Alright, so what I've done is I've just done another coat of null oil over the gun, so that should darken it down nicely once that's dried. And then we've got a couple of little dribbly bits, and what we're going to do with them is I use pallid witch flesh, give them a nice couple of coats of that to make it a good strong colour, which I'll do a couple of bits there, make sure I get both sides of it, like that. And there's a couple on his back, just here. Horrible nasty stringy bits, and dribbling from here. So we get pallid witch flesh on them all. Just make sure that's a good coat. And again, just down there to make sure it's nice and bright enough. And while that's drying, I've got a hard coat here, and this is just to go over the tongue, like so, just to make it look all slimy and nasty in there. So once that's dry, that'll obviously be all shiny and wet looking. So we need to let the pallid witch flesh dry, and then we are going to use clear yellow from Tamiya. It's quite fumey, this, so you need to be a little bit careful with using it. But what we're going to do is just take a little dollop on the end of the brush and just paint the little dribbly bits with this colour, so it makes them all shiny and basically quite nasty yellow looking. I'll just finish all these off quickly. Oops. And then we've got the dribbly bit coming out of here. We want it to get darker towards the bottom, so if you sort of drag it towards the bottom of the blob, it'll obviously start to congeal a bit down there, and that's what we're after. And this side over here. Okay, so that's the nasty yellow slimy colour in there. And then once that's dry, we'll move on to the next step. Okay, for the next step we're going to take a little bit of typhus corrosion. And using quite a small brush actually, what we're going to do is we're just going to dab a few blobs onto some of the metallic areas, like down on the chainmail here for example. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing there. I'm going to put some blobby bits in there, a couple of portions on the gun, just where it would start collecting dirt and nastiness. We'll put some bits in there as well, like around the icon. Just any sort of raised areas. Down in the back there as well. A little bit on the sword, in some of the holes on the back, and around the top and on the handle. And then we've got this metallic area up here on the vent, and we're just going to splodge a bit on there as well. It's sort of a case of less is more, but at the same time, I find with this paint in particular, it just sort of ends up drying brown. I don't really see much of a texture in it, so you can see we've got some in here, and it's pretty much just brown. It's really not very textured, but I don't know if that's just I'm not using it right, or it's a bad pot or something. I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, that's a little bit on this side as well. Just realised we can't have it only on one side of the gun. Let's have a bit around here, just blobbed in there a little bit. But as I say, it's sort of a case of less is more. You don't want it to be too much. You don't want it to just end up being a brown gun. So we've just got some little splodges around for that. And then what we're going to do, because we're avoiding now the bronze areas, we are going to take nihilic oxide, and we're going to do something fairly similar with the bronze bits. So, just around some of the edges, or some of the joins, and then some of the detail. Sorry, that's not staying open for some reason. There we go. Some of the details, like around some of these rivets on the shoulder pad, just in the joins under the, in between the two sections of the shoulder pad, and around some of the skulls. Just going to put a bit of this nihilic oxide in there, just to give it that old verdigris bronze effect, and a bit on the inside. So we've got the little holes on the inside, again just around some of the rivets and the detailing on the shoulder pad trim, in some of the holes, a bit on there. Around to the back, we're going to put a little bit on the sword hilt, and then on the blight launcher, in this case, we've got a couple of areas. We can put a bit around the three circle icon. And there are a couple of other bronze areas as well. Again, on the rivets and the details in there. I'll just put a bit around here. Possibly a little bit too much in some of those areas, but it doesn't matter too much because we're going for a sort of dirty knackered old look anyway. So that's okay. That one. And then with the Riser Rust, what I'm going to do with this is just take a very small amount of it. I know it's technically a dry brush paint, but I actually quite like using it just with a normal brush. And on some of the metallics, like on the chainmail, we're just gonna put a bit of the rusted effect on there. So hopefully you can see a bit. There's a little shape, way too much in there, but I can dull that down a bit in a second. That's fine. And again, on the gun, we're going to pick a few areas, like around some of the dings and the scratches, where we can just put a bit of the rust effect, and some of the edges and where the different parts of it join up. And a little bit on what I assume is the ammo casing down the bottom and around the back, particularly in some of the holes and around some of the holes. And make sure we've got some over here on this side and on this. Again, what I assume is ammo hopper. Tiny bit on, oh, that's too much. Let's try and get rid of that a bit. Tiny bit on the grenade. On the sword blade on the back, we can put a little bit, and some more on this exhaust vent on the backpack. And that is pretty much that. So you can see we've got quite a few different colours going on the blight launcher. Oh, hand in the way. With the rust and the nihilak oxide and the typhus corrosion. I'm just going to do a little smidge on the feed, or on the back trim of the leg armour there as well. And yeah, that's pretty much that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera slightly. Hopefully this will work okay. And hopefully you'll get slightly better lighting on this as well. So let's get that out of the way. What we can see is we have got the sort of dirty brown or dirty bone colour of the armour with the bone coloured teeth, the shiny red tongue, the sort of greeny grey cloth, which has come out quite nice actually on this one on the back. The rusted up sword, the bone colour areas and the fleshy bits. And then we've got the horrible nasty dribbly yellow stuff as well. So I'm relatively pleased with that guy. He's come out alright. What I might try and do is give him a red eyes. And what I do for this is in the eye area, I'll hit it up with pallid witch flesh, just because that's what I've got on my palette normally, because I tend to use quite a lot of it with these guys, and just run it through his eye area. In this case he's just got the one visor slit, but obviously if they've got eyes I'll do each individual one. And then I will take some of the transparent red that we used earlier, the Vallejo stuff, and I'll just very carefully, oh, messed that up a little bit, very carefully run that through, as I say, in this case the eye slit, but into each of the eyes to give him a sort of red visored effect. This guy's actually relatively clean armour wise. There's not all that much additional detail and trimming and things on there, but if you look at this example of a death shroud, you can see, because there's lots of additional metallic areas, I've gone a little bit more overboard with the nihilak oxide and the rust and such. Same principle on the cloak. I went with the brown, with the greys. Didn't go quite as highlighted on this one, but went with the greys and then the overbrush. Then the Athonian camo shade over the top. Same green, same skin idea as well, with the different layers of the tanned flesh mixed with
Pallid Witch Flesh. And again, I think he's come out all right. So I'm quite happy with this guy. He'll do for just a normal troop option. So I'll finish off the rest of his squad in due course, and they'll be on the channel, hopefully, in the not too distant future. I hope that came out all right. It's the first time I've tried doing this, and I realise there's probably significantly better ways I could go about doing these sort of mini guide / tutorial videos. Hopefully the lighting's all right, and if you've got anything you would like me to paint and go through how I do it, please let me know, and I will try and get that done for you. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Hope this was useful to you. Leave comments and such if it was or wasn't. If there's anything I can do better, let me know. And yeah, thank you very much. Stay tuned for more, and I very much appreciate your watching. Cheers. Bye.